All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to wrap up the afternoon with Michelle. She is going to cover graphic design and accessibility. So, Michelle has over a decade of experience designing and developing training materials for court staff in the state of Minnesota. She has honed her skills in graphic, presentation, and training design, establishing herself as a top performing e learning creator. She has also been recognized for her expertise in digital accessibility and inclusive design, and has actually presented at events with over 900 registered attendees to governing bodies within Minnesota's legislative branch. So, thank you, Michelle, for taking the time. And I'll go ahead and turn my video off, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. So,
Did we lose Michelle? Oh, okay. So we will give Michelle just a minute to come back in. Let me open chat. All right. I know, Nicole, I'm not really sure. So while we wait, why doesn't everybody let me know where you're from? Where's everybody logging into today? Denise, Seattle, Washington. Nice. I'm here in Florida and it is super hot today. I'm pretty sure we broke 90. Upstate New York. Nice. Canada, Austin. Denise, it is not lovely. It's lovely in the morning. I'll give you that. Nicole's here from Rhode Island, wearing her puffy coat. Oh, I'm jealous of you, Nicole. It is hot. I start out in sweaters in the morning and end up in like t-shirts in the afternoon. Poland, awesome. Hot in Texas. All right. So, yeah, we're going to just hang tight while Michelle hopefully is able to get back in. In the meantime, I know I hosted a session earlier today, very unique, and I thought kind of cool. She did, who was our speaker earlier? Laura. Did anybody get a chance to attend this morning with Laura? She did the marketing and training like connection. It was really cool to listen to some of her ideas about that. I missed the one in the afternoon. We could turn it into a Q&A until there she is.
that's weird. Hello. I might have to just
Yeah.
get you without a presentation if this isn't going to work.
It was sharing before, so we can try.
Interesting. We can. How about we try one more time?
Let's give it a
This
shot.
is
We've been
just,
catching up on where everyone is located, so we're ready for you.
I had to pull up my non-Chrome window to see that you were talking. I was like, I'm not there.
We're holding it down.
All right, so let's try this again. I'm gonna use some of my screens here to separate out some things. All right, if we're gonna share a screen, I'm gonna share. Let's do that. Bear with me, guys. This is just the life of a L&D'er, isn't it? Share. Let's see what we got going. So I think I'm still here. I see myself on the screen, and I think
Yes,
y'all can see. Hi, my name is Michelle.
we
I think
got
it's
it.
over there. Ha. Awesome. So I'm less 10 minutes. It's okay. because I don't have that many slides. I just like to go by ear on this anyway. So, hi, I'm Michelle Engstrom. Christine did a lovely introduction. Basically, I do all things graphic design and accessible design, and I like to combine the two. I have presented at a couple of these before, so I think a lot of you have heard my spiel. I started with graphic design, been doing that. First paid gig was when I was 15. Very proud of that. Did my first character design for somebody then, and but then I decided because I'm a first generation immigrant whose parents would hear nothing of me being an artist, that I was going to go into psychology and try pursue a law degree, and ended up in the courts, where I used my art to make all of my documents pretty, which pretty ended up meaning communicated better. So, with that as my little intro, we're going to go into my presentation, that is graphic design is accessibility. Specifically, digital accessibility is what I present on. But I think if we were to pull that out, it does suit accessibility in general. Oh, and before I go too far, I do want to say I do have my eye on the chat, so feel free to shoot out questions, comments. I do like to make this interactive and not just all the Michelle show. So, graphic design is accessibility, and I like to present on this because a lot of people don't really see them as being in the same realm of each other. They think, well, if I have to make this digitally accessible, it cannot then be nice looking. I have to strip away all the fun things or all the nice things, and that's just not the case. And we're going to look at a case study that I've done first and foremost, and see if we can get a little some people waking up after their lunch nap. But you see these two posters. They're for a lovely program in Minnesota called the Minnesota Legal Kiosk Project, where community members can go and find kiosks that have a computer. Depending on which one you go to, some of them have a printer and a scanner. They have headsets and cameras so that people could go to their access legal information or go to their courts digitally when we were all jumping to remote court and not everybody had that infrastructure. So that's just a shout out for the Legal Kiosk Project. But when we're looking at these two posters, I just want to see if anybody has any input on which one they think is the digitally accessible poster. Is it this one that's A, the one that's more graphic in nature? It has, the lovely icons, it has color, or do you think it's maybe B, and you can see it's a little more straightforward, it has text, things are in line, and I'm seeing I am not fooling anyone here in this chat, as Denise and Christine have both said A, and you'd be correct, but you'd be surprised how many people think B would be the most accessible one. And I'm talking digitally accessible. I agree with Ren that A, because it's easier to look at. Yes, Nicole, both of them are PDFs. And A is easier to look at. So if we think of just an accessible version, just if you were to look at it, print these both off, which one is more accessible in terms of approaching it? Which one's easier to kind of get the information from and see the information? Definitely A. If I do say so myself, but it's a little easier to kind of break down the information you need right away. And it definitely doesn't overwhelm you. But a lot of people will look at B and say, well, that's my experience of digital accessibility. I want to put in all the nice things, but then I'm told that color contrast, that's not accessible. I'm told that, I can't put things, I can't use my tables as a layout, or I can't use too many spaces, or that's not accessible. So B is usually what I hear. A lot of people saying that's their experience of being told to make an accessible document. It simply just doesn't have to be the case. Now, the great thing is it's not just approachable and more accessible from a visual standpoint, because visual design is usually print, how things look, is got, you know, that's usually what we think of when we think of graphic design, different things like, oh, we want to make sure that, there's balance, that things are aligned, things are in proximity to each other. That's what we call graphic design, and we usually equate that to visual design. When we talk about digital accessibility, we're talking more about the design behind the scenes. It it's also, uh, of course, I'm going to lose all my words and thoughts because I'm in front of a lovely group. But it's also, and I see Alexandra's getting ahead of me with her balance and proximity. I have a whole slide. I'm just kidding. That's great. I'm really happy that you guys already know it, because we know this about graphic design, but we need to bridge the gap on how to make that meet with digital accessibility, and how to bridge that gap so we can still have these lovely visual design principles, the balance, the proximity, and not have them introduce barriers in a digital level, so that it's still an equal opportunity for people with disabilities, people who use assistive technology, to get the same information without without having to sacrifice our design, because design helps visually. So we don't want to necessarily add barriers for the 1/5 of people in the world who have disabilities, and I'm included in that statistic. These this poster B, if I came across this, I would shut down, move out, because my dyslexia and my ADHD could never. I wouldn't be able to glean any of that information from this. Um, but my A would tell me, okay, I can see here that it has, it has nearby locations. There's video capabilities and kind of the high level. And if I wanted to then look into it further, I could go, and there's a QR code, so uh, a link which is clickable on is would be clickable on the digital accessible, or the emailed version, the digital version, but this was meant to be a poster printed out. Um, so that's why it's not underlined. It should probably still be underlined now that I'm looking at it, but hindsight's 2020. So how can we bridge that gap? That's really what digital accessibility is about, and what I like to teach people, because I went from having this poster B and being asked to create poster A. Like I said, it was meant for print, but since I worked for the courts in Minnesota, we're a government agency, there was a caveat of, but this will also be posted online, so it does have to be digitally accessible. I'm happy to say that Minnesota is kind of ahead of the curve there, and that we do try and make everything digitally accessible. Is it always successful? That's not up to me to decide, but we do try our best. So, with that said, I think this is sharing my window, so I should be able to just open this, and I'm going to go over. Let's see. Of course, it opened in the wrong window. It didn't even open in. Let's do this. Send to. Open with. There we go. There we go, guys. So, if I bring this over to Adobe Acrobat and I run our accessibility checker, this actually fails real hard with the accessibility. You only see my presentation still.
So
Well, let's
yeah,
fix that.
Michelle, we're still just seeing the presentation. So if you share just a window, then it's just going to show the
I shared the whole
presentation.
screen,
Okay.
so let's stop presenting and then I can share again. I don't mind. We'll figure this out. All right, so here we go. So this is, I ran the accessibility checker. It's under all tools, prepare for accessibility, and then check for accessibility. And it did fail most of the accessibility checks, mostly because it's not tagged. So whoever made this document didn't make it from an accessible source, or at least maybe they printed as PDF, didn't keep any of the original um, their original accessibility things that they put into there. Um, the main issue is that it's not tagged, and then that all falls apart because then screen readers can't identify anything, and there's technically just a blank page. So what I do when I get to this, and what I like to tell people, is accessibility should start from the very get-go. I think a lot of us in the community are aware that one of our first things we do is we need to keep an eye on making sure that what we work on is not going to cognitively overload our viewers, and that's actually something that we need to make sure on an accessibility level as well. Like I said, if I were to look at this, I know from a mile away that this is not a resource made for me or my neurotype, because it's overwhelming. This map here, while I'm sure it has lots of good information, is teensy tiny and has lots of little dots. It's a map of Minnesota, by the way. Um, and I guess the blue and the green depends on what type of kiosk there is. It's to me, it's just noise. I can't figure that out. Um, so is that necessarily a useful image to add? I would say it's not. That would be something I would take out of there, because if you went on the site itself, there's actual locator. This is like a snapshot of the locator, and you can zoom in and zoom out on the area you actually want to be. So I don't think it helps to have a snapshot of it when it's that busy. That would be one of the first things I take out. So what I like to do when I first get to this, if I am presented with a PDF, then I export it to Word or whatever document processings you have. Um, and you can do that over here, by the way, export PDF, Microsoft Word. And I'm going to keep an eye to see if it actually lets me show you guys. Otherwise, I'll just unshare and reshare. I don't think it did. So I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to reshare the screen so you guys can see the Word document. It's exactly the same, but let's start from there. Oh, and thank you, Ren, for pointing it out before. I wouldn't have seen it otherwise. All right, so this is the Word document. Like I said, it's just a way for us to start. Other times you might get like a info dump. You might have to take a lot of notes after talking to a subject matter expert. Um, yeah, I usually get a bunch of information. I like to collect more information than I need and then kind of figure out from there what I need. Um, but this is where, even from the start, and we don't necessarily always see this as an accessibility step, more so as just part of our job as learning and development practitioners, that we try to figure out what the scope is, what's relevant information, what's not relevant information, and we try to combat things like cognitive overload. These are all like words that we're all aware of if we've been in the space for long enough. But like I said, these are actually things that help with accessibility as well. We don't want to overload. We don't want to put in things that are going to make it more difficult for someone who already has a hard time parsing through information like myself. I already have a hard time kind of looking at a screen and not feeling overwhelmed. So when I open up a resource, I need it to not be overwhelming because I already have a hard time in my brain not making things overwhelming, if that makes sense. So the first things I like to do is I like to separate out any images I have with any text based things that I have. And a pro tip in Word, Microsoft Word, is opening the selection pane. And if y'all haven't ever done that before, it's a magical thing that you can just do on the Home tab under Editing, select Selection pane. This is also really good because for accessibility, you can't have text boxes and you can't have text within shapes because screen readers will not read those. So if you see any of these say text box or shape and there's text in it, you're going to want to take that text out and put it in the body of your document. So just so you know, I'm going to also use select objects, because then that's just going to select all my pictures without selecting any of my text. And oh, it didn't work. And I'm going to move that all to the bottom, trying to get it under that little legal kiosk word there. I'm going to do it one more time. Try to get it under. Yep. This one too. I'm guessing that this one is not in. Oh, it is in line. So I'm going to move this one under. It does not want to move. That one's getting deleted. I'm not fighting with it right now. I love Microsoft Word until it doesn't want to behave, and then I don't love Microsoft Word. So now you can see I have all my images at the bottom. I'll go over why we are not keeping any later. And then I have all my text based at the top. And if you're starting off from a document like this and you have anything that are in columns, hopefully not in tables, but you can always reveal if there are tables by going to the Home tab, Paragraph, and turning on your grid lines. Tables used for layout are not accessible. We don't want that. So you just want to lay out everything in a vertical format so that we can see what's there without having to worry about our layout right now. So I'm going to highlight all the text, go to Layout tab, Columns, and I'm just going to put it into one column. And of course, now it's going to jump some stuff over the other side. So let me insert the page break where I want it. Not sure. There must be a page break here. Okay. I'm going to force those over to the other side again. So again, I'm just separating out images from text. So when we get, let's say this is the information we have, what we want to work with, and I'm not trying to right now make it look like the poster that I had showed you, just because that came with a lot of back and forth, a lot of talking with my subject matter experts, and even a few runs through my plain language subject matter experts at the time. So we're just going to look at it as if we had this information here. What do we want to do with it? And let's say we wanted to keep everything that we see on this page. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, oops, I clicked the wrong thing. I'm going to clear formatting just to make a point with this. So we'd have just the text and we're saying, yep, this is great. This is what we want on our document or our poster, but we want it digitally accessible. So what's great is that we already have it kind of broken up into sections. This is another part that us as learning and development specialists, we already kind of intuitively do, where we kind of separate things out into topics and subtopics. Um, but we need to keep in mind that this is something we want to keep track of because we need to use what's called heading styles. And I'm sure if anybody has even rudimentary digital accessibility training, you've heard you need to use heading styles and they need to be in order. You can't jump from a heading 1 to a heading 3. But what does it really mean? Well, what I like to tell people is sometimes you got to think of it, you got to put it into a perspective of something you already know, and that can be a familial relationship. So you can have a parent and a child, but you can't have a grandchild if you don't have that step in between. So if you think of it more like a family tree, you can't jump to grandchild without a child. You can't jump to a great grandchild without the last two steps as well. So you want to keep those relationships in mind. So if we make the Minnesota Legal Kiosk Project, if we make it a heading 1 and we make the next part a heading 2, and let's say who can use them is a subtopic of what is the legal kiosk. I don't want to just jump to a different heading level because I liked how it looked better, let's say. Like, oh, yes, of course, now it's not showing up, so I don't have this. I want to show all of the styles. Not recommended. We're just going to do alphabetical. So I can show you all of the heading styles. And let's say I just really liked how, for unknown reasons, I really liked how heading 4 looked. So I decided to skip to heading 4 instead of using heading 3. But that means you went from having a parent child to a great grandchild without having the grandchild. So you don't want to do that. You want to definitely use a heading 3 instead. And you can always change the way you want that to look. So let's say you already had it the way you wanted it to look. Oh, we're going to make it a dark purple. It's bold. It's this font. It's obviously for unknown reasons. And you want that to be your heading 3. You can always right click on heading 3 and update heading 3 to match that selection. And there, you don't ever have to necessarily play around with it to make it look exactly the way you want it. And it still works out. I'm just going to read really quick in the chat here because I know Nicole knows her stuff. So Nicole says, screen readers can read the page by headings and allows the user to determine the levels of importance and structure of content. Rule of thumb, one heading 1 per page. And that's so true. It's going to be the same for if you do a website, you want to try stick to one heading 1 because it just helps with skimming as well. And thank you, Nicole. I'm glad you're liking it. It's a little off the cuff for me, but I rather have y'all see my authentic self than my polished self. So there we go. So we go from a heading 1 to a heading 2 to a heading 3. And that's how we make sure that the semantic part of it, the process of that the screen reader is going to read so that it can translate what we are seeing to what a screen reader is announcing. That's how we get those things over. So that's what the styles do. And that's on the home tab again. And I usually like to pull it out. Now, you are going to see on here that there's heading 7, 8, and 9, but most screen readers will only read 1 through 6. So heads up. I know that's not always stated everywhere, but if you can try stick to 1 through 6, I know it's easier said than done when you have a 50-page document, but try your best. So with this, we look at it and you might ask, well, why can't I just go in here and do bold and do large and say, well, there. Now you and I can both see that that's obviously important information. But if we don't add that layer, that style layer that then gets announced to a screen reader, that's essentially the same as the text under it. It it's no different to a screen reader. It won't announce that there is suddenly bold size 28 font right here. It'll just read it like the same it would this sentence as it would the whole paragraphs underneath it. So that's why we want to use the heading styles to announce significant topics, subtopic shifts. If there's something you need to call out, the heading styles are important. I know that the Word does have some of these emphasis and subtle emphasis and really attractive little names here, but those do not actually pass through to PDF, and there's not actually a way for screen readers to read that as anything different. These just go through as body text. So headers are what's important to pull through, and then everything else is body text, except for when it comes to lists and numbering. And that's, I mean, if you want it to be consistent, you can set those separate, there's, list bullet 2, list bullet 3. You can set those consistent styles if if your organization needs those to always look a consistent way, then you can do that. Otherwise, you can just use up here. These will pull through to a screen reader. So if you needed like these paragraphs here to be bulleted for any old reason at all, this would come through as a list to a screen reader. You don't necessarily have to use a style for that. It's just the headers, and then body text is what we call the rest of it. Another thing you want to keep in mind is that there are the headers and footers, but not all screen readers will read those. We'll announce those right away. In fact, most of them have to be opened separately. So if it's not what we call redundant information, like a page number, if you have if you have your logo in the top, or if you have all rights reserved, or this is a document by blah, 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 those things can go in the header and footer. But at the core agency I was a part of, we used to put last revised date, and that would be in the footer. And I advocated to get that out of there because that's actually important information. If somebody opens a document and they don't know that that wasn't that was updated 5 years ago, it might not be relevant information anymore. That's something that they should know right away. So we changed the revised date to be in the body of the document, right under the document's title, actually. So you just want to keep track of those things. And when I say I put everything out on the document like this, it's mostly to take out the possibility of using tables to lay out documents, because it used to be once upon a time, if we wanted things to end up next to each other, we would just add, a couple of, oh, I want a couple of columns and I want to add some space in between. So I'm just going to add a table. And I'm going to just manipulate it like that so that there's space. And now we have a table with 3 columns. One of them was just empty, and 2 of them. And then they would just go and they would say, oh, I don't want any borders. It's an invisible table. And if they didn't have the view grid lines, you wouldn't know any better visually. But how that reads to a screenwriter is it'll announce that there is a table and it will say column one, model A, and then it'll say column two, and then we'll skip. Person using a screen reader who assumedly has vision loss or has issues with vision doesn't know if there was a glitch. Was there really an empty cell or is that a glitch? They don't know. Then it skips to there's now another cell, model B, and then it just moves on. Well, was that really a table? Why is there a table? Why did there need to be a table? There didn't. So instead of using the table method, which is not accessible, to read things next to each other, so I say vertically versus forcing your eye to go horizontally, you can use columns because columns do not have that issue. And in that, you can just go to layout, columns. I always go to the more columns, even though it gives you options down there, but you have more control here. So I can say 2. I want them to be equal column width, so I'm going to keep that checked. You can add a line in between them if you want. I don't. I don't want that. And I'm going to make the space bigger because I want to, just for funsies right now. And sometimes this happens where it decides that where to add that line under the same. Next to columns, you can find breaks. There's a column break where you can say where you want that to push over. So, and then instead of just highlighting and saying, oh, model A, we're going to go and we're going to add in that header. So that makes it really clear. And again, I'm not trying to make it look pretty right now. I would not put that much of a space in between them. But if you wanted to add space before this, instead of using like a tab that you really don't need or tabbing this over that you really don't need, you can just highlight the whole area. And you can use these little markers at the top. I don't think I can make them bigger because the rest of it will zoom up, but it won't. And you can just move over the markers on the side. Another place you can find this is under the layout tab. This is the indent, and you can play with the indent over there. If you were to open up the paragraph, the little launcher, you can always do a first line indent, hanging indent, and kind of manipulate it that way. I usually just use the little thing here to click and drag it. But then I can always move it closer to each other that way if I wanted to make it smaller for whatever reason. And that doesn't add any spaces because screen readers, while we don't see it, like if I wanted there to be a big space in between these, and back in the past, we used to just hit the enter key over and over and over, and we thought that was fine. But what we didn't know is that that introduces a barrier to screen readers. That introduces extra pilcrows that get read out to screen readers as paragraphs. Paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. I had one instance where it looked like just a line across the screen, but they were really made by separate little underscores. So every little line was an underscore. And how the screen reader read that was by announcing every single little underscore. It was 86. Ask me how I know. But that was an accessibility issue because who in their right mind is going to want to sit through having the word underscore announced to them 86 times, knowing that it might happen again in the in this document, and there's no way for somebody to know that if they're depending on their screen reader to tell them what's on their screen. They're just going to nope out of that document real fast. And unfortunately, that's just the reality that most people face. Now, one thing that I did want to call attention to, and I'm kind of bummed that I got rid of the images. If you remember, a couple of the images that were down here were also um, photographs of people using the software. Um, from a visual standpoint, I I like to try stick with cohesive images. So you see that there's a lot of imagery of little people on here. There's also these lovely icons here. And the reason why I went with icons is because one, I like icons. And two, I decided I was going to keep this logo for the legal kiosk project. And that lended itself more to these little icons that they had. So I didn't want to mix and match too much because that can be overwhelming. It takes a different part of our brain to say, this is a photograph, an actual depiction of what happens, and this is an image. This is a graphical image that somebody drew. So you don't want to make so much switches in the brain. If you're going to have one style of image, you want to try stick to that style of image, just to lower cognitive overload. I'm losing my train of thought. So that's why I immediately erased those. Again, I am just not a fan of this map. It is just way too much in one image. I think it helps better just to tell people there are many, many kiosks near you. Go here, like click on this locator to find them. And that just makes more sense than overloading them with an image that really does them no good. Um, so, because at the end of the day, I'm gonna unshare again so I can get my stop sharing so that I can get my presentation back. Resume slideshow. Okay. Screen. All right. So, like I was saying, as you can see, I stuck with the icons over here because I didn't want to have people switch in their minds too much with the codes. I'd let them know what they can find, but then lead them to where they can find it. I did push hard to not just depend on the QR code for things or a link, as that's not the most user friendly for lots of people with disabilities. However, I lost that fight. Sometimes we gotta know that if we're working within an agency, we're not gonna always have the most accessible this or that. But the main goal, and we're going to start with the main goal of graphic design, is to effectively communicate. I can't say that enough. It's all about communication. So it's to effectively communicate a message or idea visually through the strategic use of visual elements like imagery, color, layout, etc., typography, font, etc. But the main goal of digital accessibility is to remove the barriers so that all of your work that you did with the graphic design is still accessible to people with disabilities and who use assistive technology. So when I go on and wax lyrical about how digital accessibility does not have to be to the detriment of graphic design, it's because they're both the same thing in my mind. We're trying to communicate the most effectively to the most people. And if your communication is leaving out 1/5 of the population, is that really effective? Are you really doing your job? I would say no. So I I really don't see how those could be any separate. Well, how those could be separate if they are the one and the same in my mind. Um, and I think it's not a matter of figuring out how to force it to be accessible ahead of time. And it's not difficult. It's just different. We just didn't learn these things once we got them. It's like death by PowerPoint. We were given PowerPoint, everybody opens it, and the first option they get is to add a bullet point. So, of course, we have PowerPoints with all these bullet points everywhere because that's what we were presented. But when you learn how to use PowerPoint, you can make these where things fly in and things fade out. It doesn't have to be death by PowerPoint. It doesn't have to be overloading. It can look nice, and some of the animation can even draw your attention instead of just make things fly in and spin. It's the same with graphic design. I made that I made that poster for the legal kiosk project. I made it in PowerPoint, and then I translated it over to Word, and it translated just fine. I made the graphics in PowerPoint, but I flattened them and put them over into Word. Um, and you don't need fancy programs to do that. It's I'm all about accessibility in the terms of what can I afford as well. So I know a lot of people are biting at the bit to jump at Canva or anything like that, but if you just spend a little time in learning how to do the things and in some of the programs that we already have, I know Google Slides can do a lot of this stuff too. Um, you don't need to spend the extra money. It's all perfectly capable here, and some of these giant tech companies, software companies, are working on accessibility and have been working on accessibility, where some of the other ones that are the newer ones that just come for speed, they try to come in for profit, have left accessibility by the wayside. And I would, once again, if you're not making if your graphic design is not effectively communicating to 1/5 of your viewers, then you're not doing your job. Why would you even use that program? So, with that, you can look at the principles of graphic design, and just as I think it was Alexandra was pointing out, these are what we look at for visual design. This is, contrast, balance, emphasis, proximity, negative hierarchy, negative space. These are what makes our visual design easier for our learners to grasp, to see. And these are important because that would be the other percent of our viewers, and we don't want to forget that. We don't want to do by the wayside any of this graphic design just because we think, well, I have to be digitally accessible. I have to get rid of these other things. We still want our visual graphic design. These are here for a reason. I love them. You can tell all my stuff is nice and pink and branded. So I'm beholden to my graphic design. But we don't want to lose sight that digital accessibility is removing barriers so that it continues to do the good work that we put into it, that it's not for naught. So with that said, if you're here or if you're not here, I believe Luis is going to add to the Slack channel this document here, creating WCAG compliant Word documents. It's a checklist and guide that I created to make accessible Word documents. It's only to the WCAG 2.1 levels A and AA standards, just because that is the standard that the Department of Justice has stated for any government agencies or public agencies in the US. So that's why it only covers that. I would challenge anybody to always try me as accessible as possible, because WCAG does not cover cognitive impairments as well as it could. But this checklist, if you can check everything off the first page, and then the other 5 pages are just how to do so, then you can create an accessible Word document, keeping in mind that if you turn it into a PDF, there are few more remediation steps, so keep that in mind. An accessible source document does not always equate to an accessible PDF, but this will help you start on your way, and it gives you some tips on how to do it, as well as some warnings on how not to do it. So just a little thing that I wanted to give to the community because the training and learning development community has been great and I just love to share. So there we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Great presentation. I love that we got to see like a real time demo with an actual document. That was awesome. I know Luis just added the document that you were talking about in our Slack. So we've got Liz who has a question. Do you have a link that isn't routed via Slack, or do we need to be a part of the community? So I'll defer that one. Any questions in the last couple of minutes for Michelle?
So this is Michelle Engstrom. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to just hit me up DM, you can always, connect too. I accept connections. And ask me. I'll just send it your way. I just didn't want to put it out there to the masses. I'm like, well, what makes it special that you
Yeah.
guys are here?
Very
So,
fair, very fair. So great job today. I'm sure Liz is going to reach out direct. Yeah, we have a couple minutes left. If anybody has questions, again, we've been to a couple of these throughout the week. I loved like the real time demo. I think that was kind of fun in a different way than just kind of like looking at slides. Just watching how you did everything was really cool. So thanks for the presentation today.
yeah, thank you for having me. I know I like to go through how to do them. I was very close to just making a whole new document with y'all to go through, but like my ADHD could never. We'd be on like 10 different stories,
No
10
doubt. And
different
it was great.
tangents.
Yeah, it was nice to start out with the option A and B and watch how you were able to convert it. The why behind was always helpful. So that was cool to see. So hopefully everybody got some tips and tricks. We have a free takeaway from Michelle today. And I know we have a couple sessions still scheduled for tomorrow. So we'll wrap up the Women in L&D 2025 on Friday. So hopefully we'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon. And thanks again, Michelle. Great job. And we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, everybody who came by.
Bye, everybody.